There's a story told about a young yeshiva bocher, Moshe, who was called in to see his Rebbe after he had spread a nasty rumor about one of the other boys at the yeshiva. The Rebbe instructed Moshe to go home, take one of his feather pillows, climb the highest hill he could find, take a knife, cut a hole in the pillow, and release the feathers into the wind. The Rebbe then told Moshe that when he completed his task to report back for further instructions. Moshe did precisely as his Rebbe told him. When he returned, Moshe announced proudly that he had done exactly as he was instructed to the very letter. "Very well," said the Rav. "Now return to the top of that hill and gather together all the feathers." Moshe looked at his master in astonishment and said, "Rebbe, that's not possible. All the feathers have already been scattered with the wind. Who knows where they've gone?" "Ah," said the Rebbe, "so too was it with the terrible things that you said about your friend. Like the feathers in your pillow, your words, once your words are spoken, they escape from your lips and they can never be retrieved. For you see, they take on a life all their own, and no one can own them or control them. My son," the Rebbe concluded, "guard your words carefully, lest they hurt and defame others, for wounds heal, but not words." My father used to say, "It isn't what you say, it's how you say it." And though certainly what we say is important, how we use language, how we speak to each other, our tone of voice, and our choice of words all communicate who we are and what we value. For us Jews, words matter. In the creation story of Genesis, God breathes into the first human the nishmat chayim, the breath of life, and Adam becomes a nefesh chaya, usually translated as a living soul. But the Aramaic translator of the Hebrew Bible, the medieval sage Onkelos, suggested that a more accurate rendering is that Adam became a speaking soul, following the idea that creation came as a consequence of God's speech, as it's written, Vayomer Adonai Yehi Or Vayhi Or. And God spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. For Jews, speech is far more than simply beating words together upon an idea or thought. Speech creates life and new realities. It's the defining attribute that separates us from every other creature in the animal kingdom. Precisely because speech is so central and urgent a concern, rules of speech were addressed early on in the Bible and rabbinic literature. From our earliest history, our sages regarded gossip as among the gravest of sins, so much so that they equated gossip with the three most heinous sins of all: adultery, idolatry, and murder, because like those three, gossip destroys worlds. Now that may seem hyperbolic, but the harm done by speech is worse than the harm done by stealing or by cheating someone financially. Money lost can be repaid, but the harm done by speech can never be repaired. As a rabbi, I'm constantly aware of our tradition's preoccupation with speech because words are the tools of my trade, as they are for poets, writers, and journalists, teachers, actors, talk show hosts, lawyers, politicians, and diplomats, so many of you here tonight. But words are important not only for those of us who use them as an art form or professionally. They are the primary means by which we build our relationships with one another, share information, and disseminate news. I write and speak a great deal, and though from time to time I wish I could take back what I've said or written, I've learned that unless I'm prepared to have reported what I think and feel on the front page of the New York Times, I keep my mouth shut and my pen still. Rabbi Akiva coined the phrase "siag l'chochma shtika." Silence is a fence around wisdom, which means that a wise person maintains silence unless he or she has something of value to say. Maimonides added that a person should not respond quickly nor speak too much, which means that whenever we find ourselves emotionally wrought up, that we bide our time until we've calmed down and have had a chance to reflect more deeply on what we think, believe, feel, ought to say, and not say. There's so much good that has come with new communication technologies, such as email, texting, Facebook, and Twitter. People are sharing news, art, poetry, photography, music, their favorite new restaurants, and travel destinations, and good news about family and friends. Twitter offers for us a way to filter through headlines and find quickly what we want and need to know in business, local, national, and international affairs, entertainment, politics, art, and culture. Unfortunately, however, not all that's related to the developing media is positive. First, many of us spend too much time sitting in front of a screen of some kind, large or small, in lieu of being with people or simply being alone, or daydreaming and relaxing and rejuvenating ourselves. Though we may be sitting and communicating with others on Facebook, we're more infrequently sitting face-to-face with actual people. Being a step or two removed from others enables some of us to post things reactively and without thinking that we'd never say something to someone's face because it's unkind and hurtful. Technology intensifies the urgency for us all to exercise greater self-control and discipline in accordance with moral guidelines around speech. The truth is, we humans love to talk about others, and gossip may be our greatest weakness and ethical challenge. A 2013 survey found that 85% of people admitted to gossiping in the workplace. A 2009 survey revealed that 80% of all of our conversations are spent discussing other people and their habits. Though uttered 1,600 years ago, the Jerusalem Talmud was right when it was written that what's said here can kill in Rome. Today, whatever we say travels at the speed of light in a million directions. In the Al-Chet prayer of the Yom Kippur liturgy, we'll stand together in this sacred space and confess as a community to wrongs we've committed with words, such as hardening our hearts to the pain of others, speaking ill of other human beings and hurting them. Of the 43 sins enumerated in the Al-Chet confession on Yom Kippur, 11 are sins committed through speech, a significant percentage of moral wrongs to which we as a community are held accountable. Of course, not all of our conversation about others is morally wrong or harmful. There's a significant difference between what we might call good speech as opposed to gossip, which Judaism regards as always ethically wrong. Our talking with a friend, for example, about another person with whom we may be having difficulty can be a good thing if our motivation is to better understand what's gone wrong in order to resolve the problem and move forward positively and more happily with or without that other person in our lives. Good speech about others can also draw us together, promote ethical rules of social engagement, and behave more productively and ethically. Evolutionary psychologists believe that the human need to chatter about each other was the original stimulus that pushed humanity to develop language and grow more complex societies. What's at the heart of this issue of good speech versus gossip is the question of what constitutes an ethical system and how we build such a system for ourselves and live accordingly. Simply said, an ethical system promotes constructive human relationships. Anything we say and do that causes division between people and groups, that tears them down, that embarrasses, humiliates, diminishes, and destroys another person's dignity and or livelihood, and that sows suspicion about them, is unethical. There's much to guide us in Jewish tradition already about the ethics of gossip. Some passages in the Torah are well known, such as, "You shall not go about as a talebearer. You shall not utter a false report. You shall not hate your brothers and sisters in your heart. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge. You shall not curse the deaf, nor place a stumbling block in the way of the blind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Though there are many separate statements in Jewish literature about how to control gossip, it wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that a systematic study of all aspects of public and private slander was written down for the first time. It was compiled and written by Rabbi Israel Meir HaKohen from the small Lithuanian town of Radiance. He called his book Chafetz Chaim, meaning the seeker of life, and it was published anonymously in 1869 when Rabbi Israel was only 30 years old. The book, which is translated into English, and I recommend it to you, has become so important in modern Jewish legal and ethical literature that Rabbi Israel came to be known by the title of his book. The Chafetz Chaim cites the Talmud in noting that Lashon Hara, evil speech, damages three people equally: the person who speaks it, the person who hears it, and the person about whom it's told. And that the tongue is so dangerous that it must be kept hidden behind two protective walls, the mouth and teeth, to prevent its misuse. In Judaism, there's no such thing as an innocent bystander. The one who listens but says nothing is culpable. To stand passively by is tantamount to the commission of the crime. You shall not stand idly by while your neighbor bleeds. When we gossip, we can be led to violate other commandments as well. For example, if I were to gossip about someone behind his back, but in his presence pretend to be his loyal friend, to be two-faced, I'd be violating the commandment, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. Tradition forbids me to say to someone about a third person, don't tell me anything about him. I don't want to know anything, because this raises suspicion and impugns that third person's integrity, even if I intended no malice. If a friend should ask me, so John, tell me, what did so-and-so say about me? I'm then presented with an ethical quandary. If I'm honest and tell her that so-and-so said something uncomplimentary, then I'd be guilty of gossiping. So the question becomes, is it ethically better to lie rather than tell a negative and painful truth? The Chafetz Chaim says that if I can say something that has an element of the truth but won't fall into the category of tale-bearing, I'm permitted to tell a white lie and veil the uncomplimentary truth. But if I should think that my friend would accept such a vague response, I'd be permitted to tell a complete lie, mipnei darchei shalom, for the sake of peace. Our intent ought to be to protect each other from harm, even if it means shading the truth or not telling the truth at all. So even telling white lies under certain limited circumstances is permissible if those white lies are intended to preserve the peace. And outright lying for the sake of kindness is permissible. Both white lies and actual lies for these purposes are sewn into the fabric of Jewish tradition. I believe that what we need in all of our communications with each other these days, in face-to-face meetings, voice-to-voice, and in the ether of the multitude of communication media available to us, not only is a greater effort for us all to be kind, but a higher order of our language too. Vulgarity is neither a sign of strength or of truth, and it reflects a coarse and hardened heart. The poet Elizabeth Alexander suggests that what we say ought to add radiance in this austere world. Our words ought to offer up comfort, hope, and love. They ought to enliven, enlighten, and inspire, and move us to live with greater dignity and moral purpose. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk advised his disciples this way: in truth, not all that is thought should be said. Not all that is said should be written. Not all that is written should be published. And not all that is published should be read. May our commitment to a higher order of speech soften our hearts and remind us that every human being created in the divine image is infinitely precious and worthy of our respect. The psalmist prayed as we do on these days of awe, Yiyu l'ratzon imrefi v'hegyon libi lefanecha Adonai tzuri v'goali. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, Adonai, my rock and my redeemer. Amen.